And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Of course, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's South Korea-U.S. policy consultation delegation wrapped up its 8-day visit to the U.S. with a goal to further improve ties with Washington.
What was on their agenda and what can we expect the two sides to cooperate on? Once the new South Korean administration takes office next month, of course, these questions will be posing to Dr. Mark Barry, Associate Editor Emeritus of the International Journal on World Peace. A very good morning to you, Dr. Barry. It's lovely to see you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Right, so last week we had this delegation, the policy consultation delegation go to the US, and it seems that the incoming Yoon government really wanted to lose no time in engaging officials in Washington. And well, I wonder what you made, how you assess this visit.
Well, it was nice that Park Jin was able to do a normal, typical meet and greet, as I call it, which is what happens when a new South Korean president is elected. I don't know if anything like that was really possible for President Moon. The most important meeting they had was with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and I would say that the others were essentially courtesy calls. And I would frankly assess that the U.S. will duly note South Korean requests, but that President Biden will make the final decision, and that includes regarding the disposition of strategic weapons on the Korean Peninsula. I should add that I do not think that President Biden will agree to meet President Yoon in Korea in late May, despite the fact that the Quad meeting will be taking place in Japan, even though the ROK may desire that. And I think it's because the U.S. prefers the usual protocol of the South Korean president visiting the White House in Washington first, and then President Biden would make a return visit to Seoul when the time is considered appropriate.
Well, speaking of President Biden, I mean, we could certainly see that issues on the Korean Peninsula nowhere near the top of the priority list for the Biden administration. But I guess for obvious reasons, you have the Ukraine issue, you have obviously the tensions with China. But now with this visit by the delegation, and if there is some, I guess, improvement in the relations between the two allies, do you see now Washington maybe tackling issues related to North Korea a little bit more different now?
Well, to be honest with you, I think that the die has been cast decades ago in terms of the usual pattern of ROK-U.S. relations. I would say that they're generally, although maybe not always, not dependent on who is in power in either nation. The U.S. has certain expectations in the alliance, and frankly, it wants them met. Now, the U.S. will likely want to closely observe how President Yoon conducts his administration in its early months. But I should also mention that perhaps the most important thing that happened in Washington last week was not just Park Jin's delegation, but that Philip Goldberg had his Senate confirmation hearing as U.S. ambassador to the ROK, and he repeated U.S.'s insistence that North Korea must fully and verifiably denuclearize. So I would say there is no change in U.S. policy or any real interest in engagement of the DPRK at present, notwithstanding what's going on with Ukraine.
And Dr. Barry, well, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol recently visited Camp Humphreys in a city south of Seoul, and this seemed to really highlight his pledge that he made in his foreign affairs piece that the US-South Korea alliance would be the central axis of his foreign policy, really bolstering the ironclad alliance. So how do you think North Korea would be really reading this and perhaps even responding to this?
Well, I believe it sends a clear message to North Korea that there is no breach in the U.S.-ROK relationship, as there had seemed to be under the previous administrations of both countries, at least in the last year or two. But keep in mind that regardless of administration, South Korean military power continues to dramatically increase annually. And this is partly why North Korea continues to emphasize nuclear weapons development as a recourse. Really, regardless of administration in South Korea, I think that North Korea has no choice but to use the only thing that it can economically afford, which is to continue to develop nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them.
You know, one of the things I think that we also need to take a look at is, with the Biden administration, the incoming Yoon administration, one of the things that they have in common, not only being more hawkish towards North Korea, but also towards China as well. So how is Beijing going to respond to this? Are we going to see, tensions between Seoul and Beijing because now that, Seoul and Washington's, their relations are improving further?
Well, actually, there's been a small or minor improvement in South Korean-China relations, at least in the cultural sphere. For example, you have the broadcast of some K-dramas, like Something in the Rain in China, after about a 5-year hiatus. However, China's ambassador to South Korea said last Thursday that deployment of a second THAAD unit would seriously damage relations. So I think the larger question, the larger issue, of course, is the implications of the war in Ukraine and China's tacit support of that war. But as President Zelensky said in his interview that was broadcast on CBS 60 Minutes last night, he said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is causing us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves who we really are. So I think in this current global climate, which to me seems very reminiscent of the period of 1937 to 1941, I think all of us in all nations have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, who are we really, and how do we respond to the plight of others and other nations?
Well, thank you as always for your insights, Dr. Barry. We hope to speak with you again soon.
Thank you.